That was my first concern. My second concern is with the location. While I can understand how difficult this would be to find a suitable location. Probably wherever we would choose to do this, there's probably going to be neighbors that are upset unless we can find a place that's completely away from neighbors. But that's difficult to do. I've spent time looking at the maps myself. I will say this particular location, I live very close to there, and so every single day on the way home from work, I go by there, and almost without fail, those soccer fields, not one but two, are being used. Saturday mornings, those soccer fields are being used. There's hardly a time those soccer fields aren't being used. Yet you go back in Bicentennial Park, and a lot of times those soccer fields are empty. So there's something about those fields that are seen as a favorable location. So from that standpoint, I'm concerned about taking that out of a use that has very, very heavy use and is obviously appreciated to something that has quite a few question marks. I guess, how would you respond? I know you said that you expect those clubs to stay within Livonia. I would certainly hope that would be the case.
Yes.
But I have concerns about that.
Yeah, I mean, those are two nice, well, let me say, one of them is a very nice 11v11 field. Both of them drain very well, and that's why they are used as opposed to more in the back end or the north end of Bicentennial Park. So it is, I mean, they do get used. There's little doubt, and obviously, I think, you know, Councilman Bahr, you've seen that as you drive by, and I've seen it as well.
Okay, and then you mentioned that the fields that we're looking at replacing are well drained. Just on that note, I'm also very familiar with the field. As you go into Bicentennial Park, it's just past the woods, south of the tennis courts, kind of nestled back in the trees there. It's a beautiful field to play on with the surrounding trees, but I know from experience that does not drain real well, so thus isn't used all that often. It would seem from a usage standpoint that would be a lot better location for this. That would be totally away from neighbors. It'd be frankly out of sight, and it's a field that's hardly ever used for soccer. Has there been consideration for that site?
That was actually the first site we looked at Bicentennial, and simply because water, sewer, and electricity were so expensive to get back to that location, that was why we rejected it. Actually, it's a little smaller than what we're proposing as well. I think that site worked out to be about 1.8 acres when we wheeled it off, which is a little smaller than what we wanted, but we would have done that, went ahead with that site and proposed that site. But the cost of, again, water, sewer, and electrical would have increased significantly, potentially doubling the cost of the project.
Okay. All right. Well, I know you guys have done your due diligence on this. I know that from just past conversations and then from your answers tonight. So thank you for that. I do have, I'll be honest, I'm not crazy about, I have nothing against dogs. I like dogs, but I like, even just from a community perspective, I like seeing right along 7 Mile, I like the look of those being active soccer fields and that being replaced while it would still be green space. And well, I don't necessarily see the dog park as a nuisance. I would miss them being used for that, especially when we have, well, I know it's difficult. We have other sites in the city, one of which I know was looked at, Bean Park, and I understand the neighbors weren't real happy about that. I wasn't part of those Parks and Rec meetings, but that's what I hear. And I certainly respect that, and I'm sensitive to that. I will say, I can see why you guys were looking at that, because that site seems to make an awful lot of sense. Mm-hmm. I would argue more than this one. The other spot, too, that I know has been considered, and I know there was some pushback to that as well, but is some of the areas over on the southern edge of the Greenmead property. So none of these things, all these things I know have objections, but I do have concerns with this site. So. I had another question for Mr. Davis. I'm brainstorming on the fly here. I see issues with this too, but what about the southeastern portion of the rec center property? I don't think that's used for anything, south of the football field. The downside of that is, depending on how you laid it out, you're potentially close to homes over there, but you can educate me if that is used, but I think for the most part that's open lawn over there for a pretty expansive space.
It is a good-sized space, Councilman Bahr. The only problem is LJL football uses that property for
For
the practice
practice.
field.
I have seen that now that you mention it. So, anyway, I'm gonna offer a denying resolution. Again, I don't have a problem with the dog park. I'm not crazy about this site for the reasons I mentioned earlier. And while I know that there's no site that everybody's happy with, I do think there are other sites that make more sense for this than this one. So.
Ted Davis, representing Parks and Recreation. At the last meeting, when we talked about the dog park, really it was brought up what was the ideal location and what would the cost be for that ideal location. There were some concerns with the 7 Mile Road, Parks and Recreation Commission approved location, so we did look at a spot that was in a different section of Bicentennial that we thought would fit the bill. And obviously we're looking for adequate acreage, access to utilities, access to parking, and not being a disturbance to neighbors, so not in the middle of a neighborhood. What we found was one location brought up at that council meeting and previously looked at by staff was north of the fire station, south of the east tennis courts in Bicentennial, kind of tucked off the back of Bicentennial Drive. As you're driving back there, it's immediately to your right. Thank you to the engineering department for finding, when we were looking at running water and sewer lines, we found a 1983 as-built plan that we're hoping is as-built, as it says, that shows water and sewer lines running back there. So again, that was engineering that found that, and it was kind of a happy discovery there that this brought down the cost of that location significantly. Without that, we would have been looking at $60,000+ more for that proposed site. So again, that location, 2.6 acres or 2.7 acres if we clear a little bit away, has the water and sewer there, and I believe the cost, we pegged it at just over $121,000 proposed construction budget. So we think that meets the criteria of what council was looking for, and I'd be happy to answer any other questions on that site.
Mr. Bahr.
Yeah, this is the best location for this dog park. I thought that before and went out and walked it again Saturday morning, and it just confirmed any small reservations I had for a number of reasons that this is the ideal place. One thing that hasn't been mentioned, I'm very familiar with this field just from some soccer involvement that I've had. This field half the time is a swamp. And I know you didn't mention this specifically, Ted, but part of what you're planning to do is some grading of that to take care of that. And so we're taking not only is this a great place for a dog park, but we're taking a spot that has been unusable much of the time and putting it to productive use through some of the improvement that we're doing. And on top of that, it's cost almost $20,000 less than what was proposed before. So bravo on all counts. Having said all that, I do have one question.
Sure.
The one thing I don't like about it is one of the things I liked about this site is that it was kind of tucked back in there. Mm-hmm. You remove all this wooded area here. It's a small area, but you remove this wooded area, and it takes away a lot of that tucked back feel. How essential is that to take all of that out? I guess what was your? I know you sent me earlier today some information on surrounding dog parks and what the acreage is, and what we're proposing here is not as large as some of those, but it's quite a bit larger than some of the others. Is it absolutely essential that we take out that wooded area? Could we get by without it?
Well, I think a couple things with that. We're not taking out that wooded area as much as we're clearing out the brush. So the mature trees, which there are a few, they would absolutely stay, and that's essential for us. We wish we had more mature trees on that side, but of course we're taking a soccer field, which soccer fields don't have trees. For good reason. So, we're really clearing out the brush in that area and cleaning up that side of it. And I understand your concern there, but I will, if you look at, and I love GIS for this, from the edge of the proposed dog park to the back property line of the nearest neighbor is over 450 feet away. So there is significant blockage already when you're talking about, you do have 2 baseball diamonds between a dog park and the nearest neighbor, actually their property line, so over 500 feet to the nearest house. So I think, you know, based upon, again, the distance we have from the neighbors, the fact that we do want trees in the enclosure, and this would give us that. And then when you look at the other communities and the size of a dog park, I think we're kind of right in the middle. I mean, we're not a Northville Novi, which is 4 acres, or some of the county parks, which might be 13 plus acres. You know, we're looking for something, what we proposed is 2.7, and I think that's a good size for this. I don't feel it's excessive. And cutting it back, I mean, we certainly could, but I think we'd lose a little bit with that.
Is the main thing you'd lose, Ted, the rotating area?
Yes, and if you look, most of the dog parks, that even the ones of comparable size, don't have that area. And I mean, you being a soccer person, you understand that turf needs to rest. And I think most of these parks that don't have that rotating area, if they could go back, they would redo it and they would put that in. We're trying to plan ahead. I mean, you know, dog parks that don't have that, and we have some good examples in Wayne County that don't have that rotating area, very soon they literally become just dirt pits, which is what we'd like to avoid. So I think the rotating area is very important for us.
You bring up a good point with that. You're right, that wooded area, as I called it, it is a lot of brush. And I'm glad to hear that you're planning to preserve the mature trees there. It actually makes me feel a lot better, because while it won't have the wooded nestled in feel anymore, I can actually envision that maybe even being an enhancement to the site now that you describe it. So thanks. Thank you very much for all your hard work on this.